Right, at 8:50 on this Thursday morning. Luke Fitzgerald is standing by. He's going to be with us in just a moment. But before that, Andy Dunn and Matt Williams were on Wednesday Night Rugby with Joe last night, and you can listen back to the full chat on the OTB Rugby podcast feed. But here's Andy on the Byrne brothers.
The word seems to be, based on the fact that he started against Connacht, he's in pole position to start against Bath, but we don't know that. Give us your out-half verdict.
I think Harry is a player as a 10 who wants to show how good he is first. I think Ross is a 10 who wants to show how good everyone else is first. It's quite a marked difference as a 10. I think from personal experience, when I was a young 10, I was in the Harry mould. I wanted to show everyone how good I was first. So Matt told a nice anecdote about a drop goal in Clonettley, but he simultaneously probably didn't tell that he wouldn't. Don't think he would have trusted me to be a game general at 21 years old and marshal a team really well and make sure everyone else fell into phase and did what they needed to do, and everyone else looked great around me. That wasn't how I played as a 10, and a lot of young 10s are like that. It doesn't equate with their talent level. It equates with where's their actual game maturity and game management. I think Ross has that in spades. He's incredibly good at making everyone else around him look excellent. He's understated. He doesn't get enough praise for that in terms of how he runs seamlessly into a Leinster team when he doesn't always start with Sexto there and everything. But the interesting thing is if you sit back from it all, Ross will probably run the team better on Saturday, but Harry, I think, has a bit more innate ability and talent. Watching an example would be for Harry, just watching a very simple skill, how he receives a pass and then delivers it to someone else. He does it so skillfully, so silky, and it's a cut above a lot of people I've seen at the highest level. It's his ability to receive and pass while under pressure, but he tries a hell of a lot of things. He tries outrageous things, he tries skillful things, he tries mundane things. He's not so much the game manager that Ross is, certainly not yet.
Okay, so that was Andy Dunn on Wednesday Night Rugby last night. Now, we are delighted this morning to be joined by AIB staff member and former international rugby player Luke Fitzgerald for the launch of this year's Goal Mile, proudly partnered by AIB. In supporting goal and encouraging people across the island of Ireland to step up together and take part in the Goal Mile this Christmas, AIB is helping to reach vulnerable communities already suffering deeply from the impact of crisis, poverty and climate change. You can complete any Goal Mile by registering at goalmile.org and taking just 2,000 steps in any place at any time during the month of December. Luke Fitzgerald, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, that was lovely. I'm glad you did that. You did a better job than I could have of promoting it. So, yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You might have heard that piece of analysis from Andy Dunn on Wednesday Night Rugby last night. It was really interesting, his breakdown of the Byrne brothers, that Harry Byrne plays at the moment to make himself look good, and Ross Byrne plays at the moment to make his teammates look good. Is that something you'd agree with, Luke?
Look, I suppose Andy would have maybe a more insightful view on that area, having played in it, because it is such a technical and difficult position to play. What I would say is it's probably more difficult given that, Harry comes into a team where there is, 3 or 4 people, I include Frawley in that are vying for that position, and he's very little time in there. So it's difficult to get into a mindset of thinking team first when you have so little game time. Like, he has 27 appearances for Leinster. What I would say is I was glad to hear Andy talk about, what he is great at. The ball handling ability has definitely stood out to me. That's something that he can lean on. And yeah, look, he will learn that as he gets more time in there. The challenge for him, and with lots of players in Leinster, is whether he actually gets time in there to really bed in and get comfortable with actually making other people look good versus trying to, I suppose, get himself in a position where he's getting selected every week. So it's a difficult balance that some of these players in Leinster have, and Harry is one of those people, unfortunately, that will be struggling to get concerted game time, which is so key in that position. So I think it's probably early to make a call on that. But I'd say I would probably agree with Andy in some respects, and I think it's down to game time.
Exactly, and I think that's the point he's trying to make as well, is that he has a limited window in which to impress his coaches, and therefore he's going to be trying that extra bit rather than, I guess, as he put it last night, being in third gear voluntarily for a bit longer, getting the best out of your teammates, as Ross is so adept at doing. And it's interesting, your name actually came up in the conversation afterwards, because Matt Williams said that he thinks it was around 2012 when you were coming back from injury, and maybe you were just trying things a lot. You were perhaps overplaying when you were trying to get back from injury, trying to get your name back on the team sheet. But I'm not sure what your recollection is of it, but he finds a comparison between that and Harry Byrne's situation at the moment, because let's not forget he has been injured and he is trying to perhaps overplay at times. I'm not sure if that's something you go along with.
Yeah, probably at different stages of our career. I mean, I was fairly long in the tooth at that stage of 2012, relatively speaking. I made my debut in 2006, so I probably didn't have the same excuse that Harry has. Probably a little bit of that. You do always. It's the challenge, and I'd say someone like maybe Jordan Larmour maybe is finding that a little bit himself at the moment as well, where a couple of injuries happen to you. You don't get any, as I said, that concerted game time that's so important for any player, but I think even more so at 10. You do end up kind of trying a little bit too hard, trying to maybe, break a team down, or try and make the big play a little bit too early, or just get a little bit nervous and anxious to get involved and have an impact. So certainly that was what I found. I'm not sure it's so difficult to say with Harry, because we've just seen so little of him. I feel unbelievably harsh actually being anyway critical of him at this point. But look, that's the reality of the situation there. He's playing competing against his brother at the moment for that position, who is, regardless of what you think about Ross Byrne, I think he's been treated quite poorly actually at international level. I think he's an outstanding player. He's a really cool head on his shoulders. He's a calm operator. They're difficult people to come up against, and he has that experience over his brother. So it's hard trying to marry that kind of being a team player versus getting your name in the headlines and trying to get back in the team. And I'd say that's been a struggle for a few people, and I'd say I probably found that myself, maybe just trying that little bit too hard. So yeah, it's an interesting point Matt makes. I think Harry is the better excuse than me, though. I think, given that he's only at the start of his career.
Who are you starting this weekend?
Sorry?
Who would you start this weekend at 10?
I think I'd start Ross. It's just given the new format, there's real pressure to get off to a good start in the competition, and I think he's a steady hand. I still think he's a big game player. To be honest with you, one thing I would say is, given the quality of the opposition that Leinster are up against, I mean, either player I think should be able to get the job done. I mean, Batter 0 for 9 in the Premiership, languishing at the bottom of the table. You get off to a good start here and you pummel them in the pack, which Leinster are very capable of doing given all the quality they have there. Should be an armchair ride for whoever's in 9 and 10 and subsequently the rest of the team. So I don't really think it matters as much, but I think if you were to be, if this was a big one, you'd start Ross. I think that's probably the basis on which they should select the team on.
If that happens at the weekend, you're then thinking, assuming Ross is his usual assured self and doesn't really put a dramatic foot wrong, that maybe he has the jersey in these big games, and maybe the only game experience that Harry Byrne will get between now and next year's Six Nations is the odd URC game, and maybe against weakened opposition, and that is when you start to have a little few concerns about the actual game time that he is going to accumulate before the end of the season.
Yeah, it's an issue I have with a lot of Leinster players. So difficult for me to say, and I know every time I see Leo Cullen, I'm sure he hates that I say these things, but there's lots of players in Leinster who'll be languishing in the same position, not getting game time, just kind of, working out in the gym and training with, look, let's face it, brilliant. They've a great and settled coaching staff. So it is a place you can learn as a young player, but at some point you have to get time on the pitch. And it's a huge challenge. I'm very concerned for the likes of Kieran Frawley, who I really rate highly. I think he actually might be the best 10 of the lot, but isn't going to get any game time in there. So I think it's a big challenge for them. And I'm surprised they've been able to hang on to them with all the kind of the new URC format, where we're not going to see many of these players get much game time. So it's a big concern, I think. And it should be a concern for Irish rugby, because that depth chart, it's ridiculous in Leinster. But if you're sitting there in the gym all the time, I can't see how you're getting better as a rugby player.
I think it was Ronan O'Gara who was saying on the show last week that you can do one season of that you can really be a sponge to a Johnny Sexton or to a Robbie Henshaw, like say if you're Kieran Frawley and flittering between 12 and 10. But after that one season, really, you need to go and get game time. And in fairness, Kieran Frawley's a bit older than Harry Byrne, isn't he? Like, so he's actually had that experience for a few seasons at this point. So what do you do if you're in Frawley's position at the end of the season and you're still not edging ahead of any of these guys?
Well, I think he has to move, if I'm being honest. Like, I can't see him. So he's made this move to the centre. He's a lovely player, but he's not going to be physical enough to play I must preface this with the aim should always be to be an international rugby player, in my opinion. And I think you have to be a specialist. I made a mistake of probably being a few different things. If you want to get selected in the team, you've got to be a specialist. So it looks like Frawley thinks that might be 12, or the coaching staff think that might be 12. I don't think he's big enough to do that. What I would say is I think he could be an outstanding 10, and he's not getting utilised there because of the backlog in Leinster. And it suits Leinster to play him at 12. But for the likes of Frawley, like, I think he has to move. I can't see him getting ahead of Henshaw, can't see him getting ahead of Gary Ringrose when they're in full flight. And I think he's a real asset for any kind of team. And it is nice that you can play the other positions, but I think he'd be an unbelievable 10. So, look, that's my opinion on that. I've been very strong on my views on Frawley. But I just really, really rate him unbelievably highly. And I think it'd be a real shame to see kind of a career wasted sitting on benches or sitting on, or not getting into squads, because he's kind of a jack of all and a master of none. Should be playing 10.
The question I wanted to ask you as well is about Jordan Larmour. You mentioned him there a moment ago. Didn't feature in November at all for Ireland. 2 starts in total for Ireland in this calendar year. He's had a tough time getting back into that team after his injuries, and there is a few questions about where he is at the moment. So what's your take on his trajectory? Is he at a stage now where he's started to negotiate the fact that your career will eventually plateau at some point? Is it just that maybe the likes of Hugo Keenan is still very much flavour of the month and hasn't put a foot wrong, and it's just a bit more patience that's required from Jordan Larmour? Or how do you see this thing playing out over the course of this season?
Yeah, look, he's come under a bit of heat, hasn't he, over the last couple of weeks? And obviously he didn't get into the team for November, so that would have been disappointing for him. Looks like things aren't falling for him a little bit as well. I can probably empathise, and I probably think that situation is a bit more similar to my own, that Matt Williams kind of comparison earlier on. Look, I think he's probably struggled a little bit with injuries here and there at critical moments, which haven't helped. Continuity and time on the pitch is so important. I keep going on about it, but it is really, really important for players in the early parts of their career. I know Jordan is a bit more established than the likes of Harry Byrne, but he has had an interrupted couple of years. So I think it'll require, that kind of injury-free period will help. I think he could probably be more involved in the games as well, because I think someone like him is very much in the Shane Williams mold to me. He should be trying to get involved all over the pitch, trying to find areas where he can get the ball off 9 and 10, where he's one-on-ones against forwards, because he'd be an absolute nightmare, given that he's kind of diminutive in size, but that footwork and pace, he'd be a nightmare anywhere. And he's a good handler of the ball as well. So I'd like to see him get a bit more involved around the pitch, have a bit more of a free role. I thought I saw James Lowe do that brilliantly in November. So there's a template there for him. And I think they know, or I think, at this point, all the wingers should know that Andy Farrell does value that. He wants you to be involved as much as possible. So I think that's what I'd be doing if I was him. I also think there's a few basic parts to his game that, aside from the attacking side and getting involved more, that he could work on. I think that aerial thing is still an issue for him at the moment. But there's the likes of Andrew Conway and Lee Halfpenny were unbelievable exponents of that skill, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be great there. So there are a few things that I think he can work on that are very fixable, and I expect to see him, regain form very, very quickly. He's an outstanding footballer, very exciting talent, and he should be competing for that jersey in the Irish team, because he can add something certainly different to lots of other players.
It's become a big talking point this week because Stuart Lancaster was asked about it in his press conference. I think it was on Monday, and he says we ask our wingers to do a lot of work off the ball. He's asked here about Jordan Larmour potentially putting on a little bit too much bulk. He rejects that, by the way. He says, I think Jordan has still got the capacity to do that, to do a lot of work off the ball. The last thing you want to do is make him too big from a size point of view, so he loses his point of difference. So again, I should reiterate, he doesn't think that he's got too big, but just in general, when it comes to wingers, Luke, is there always that constant caution that you need to have about the work that you do in the gym, about keeping that pace and the bulk that you choose to put on?
Yeah, I think so. There's obviously different people. You've got the extreme versions of the likes of Nadolo and these players who, at some point, the size will tell. And it is nice to have a certain level of that at international level, because you're going to have your periods in the game where you're coming up against brilliant athletes in large amounts of space, and if you do struggle for the size part, your technique has to, and your commitment have to be brilliant every single time you enter into a tackle. So there is that element that you have to get to a certain size, but it is his point of difference. As I mentioned earlier on, he does add something different to the team, and you don't want to lose that. And I think as well, for someone like him, he's got to recognize what his strengths of his game are versus, yes, you have to work on some of your weaknesses so that you don't get exposed too often. But his strength is always going to be what he can add to the team in attack. That footwork, that pace off the mark, that ability to find a gap where no one else can in the team to break an opposition, defense down. That's his strength. And I think, as I said earlier on, that little bit of fitness, could be the key difference that he has amongst players who are, carrying maybe an extra 10 or 15 kilos, when the game gets quick, towards, 60, 70, 80 minutes. Someone like him would be your worst nightmare coming up against you, because he's still fit, he's still flying around the pitch, he doesn't have much weight on him, so you'd expect him to not be breathing heavily, and that's where he could really, really expose you. So that's his strength. You'd like to see him focus on that, and as I said, I'd love to see him a bit more involved off the ball, particularly on the other side of the pitch, or pretty much anywhere really. That kind of free role is what you want to have someone like Jordan Larmour having.
It's amazing when we have all these discussions about Leinster. You'd swear that there was, I don't know, a big debate about the direction that the team is going in, or that they're struggling in some capacity, which is absolutely not the case. I mean, you look at their squad, Luke, and you go through the other squads that are going to be in contention for this year's Champions Cup. I'm sure as a Leinster man, you're pretty confident about this Leinster team finally getting back into the winners' enclosure.
I am. I still think, they're frontline guys. Like James Ryan, it becomes unbelievably important to this team, I think. So they need him back. And he quietly went about his business in November, I thought, and he's coming back to form. I was really, really happy with how he was playing as an Irish fan. But I think Leinster need him badly too, to be playing really, really well. I think he struggled with injuries himself the last couple of years. The likes of Johnny Sexton still makes a difference for Leinster. Robbie Henshaw's back, which is great, but they still need those guys, and it will make a difference if there's a few guys out. So injuries permitting, they still have I think they have the strongest squad in the competition. I mean, I think they're when they're on form, they're just so hard to contain. The fitness levels in the pack, the ball handling ability in the pack, the physical prowess of everyone on the team, they're just so difficult to play against when they're playing well. There has been a bit of talk about that kind of size element, and do they lack that bit of physicality? I don't think they do. I think that La Rochelle played above their ability last year, or played to the best of their ability, sorry, I should say, and Leinster had an off day. I think what's very important when you're coming up against some of those huge teams is that you're on the ball mentally, and I thought they were off slightly there. We saw that against Ulster a couple of weeks. That's a danger for them. But collisions have to happen further away from your gain line, and I thought defensively they were off the mark as well. So I think if they get those two things right, I still think they're the best team in the competition, and they don't lack any physicality. They look at that front row. I mean, those two hookers are they were my players to watch in an article I did a couple of weeks ago. In terms of the Heineken Cup, I just think they're absolute studs. Alongside those two props, I mean, you have Cian Healy and Byrne behind Porter, who looks unbelievable. But Ty Furlong to me is probably the best player in the world. I don't say that lightly, but I really do think he is so far above any other tight head prop in the world game. They're so strong there. I think there's no lack of physicality there. Just if they're off mentally against any team on their day in Europe, you can get punished. Still, to my mind, they're the team to beat. Yeah.
Best player in the world, or best tight head in the world?
Best player in the world.
Right.
Best player. If you think about how important tight head prop is, if you think about the difference between, I looked at that list and I said to myself, well, who's the furthest ahead of any other player in the world in their position? And I think that's Ty Furlong. DuPont is an unbelievable rugby player, but Aaron Smith is bloody close to him in my mind. And I could think of a couple of guys who are very close to Hooper, I think is outstanding as well on that list. But Ty Furlong, how he hasn't had a nomination so far, given how important a tight head prop is as well. I mean, your team collapses if you don't have a tight head prop. Collapses. You literally, any drop ball, any mistake you make, you get completely destroyed. So I think he is the best player in the world, and I don't make that statement lightly.
So if you were doing a World Rugby draft, your number one pick would be Furlong ahead of Bowden Barrett, ahead of Antoine Dupont.
Well, there's a reason the tight head props are the highest paid players in most of the leagues. It's because they're the most important.
Yeah, no, fair point, absolutely. Just quickly before we let you go, Luke, we're completely out of time, but Munster, Connacht, Ulster, I presume you're calling a healthy Leinster win. How do you see those 3 games going out of those 3 provinces? Are you seeing a possibility of 2 wins out of the 3?
No, I think Connacht will beat Stad. I think Ulster will. Sorry, you're right. 2 out of 3. I think Ulster will get a bonus point, though. I think they'll be really disappointed with that match against the Ospreys after a brilliant performance against Leinster. They're kind of a week-to-week team, I think, at the moment. Still can't get that consistency. Munster, I actually feel like they might get the win. Yeah, I think there's enough experience in there. They have a strong enough backline to pull out a big performance. And at a minimum, they should be looking for a bonus one. But I think they might sneak a win over there, Owen. So yeah, 2 out of 3. Just too hard for Ulster to probably get the win over in a very difficult Michelin, Stade Marcel Michelin. But I think they might get a bonus point, Jeff. So hopefully a big weekend for the Irish provinces.
Yeah, for sure. Just a reminder that Luke has been speaking to us this morning around the launch of this year's Goal Mile, proudly partnered by AIB. You can complete the Goal Mile by registering at goalmile.org and taking just 2,000 steps in any place at any time during the month of December. Luke Fitzgerald, great stuff as ever. Thanks a million for joining us.
Cheers, Owen. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers. It is 11 minutes past 9 on this Thursday morning. OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors.